mental health, and the criminal justice system. Today on The Silent Struggle, episode 4, we discuss the intersection of the criminal justice system with the Miami-Dade County courts and a model program, not just for the county, the state of Florida, but being recognized across the country. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce my co-host, David Magnusson. Chief Magnusson, welcome.
Pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to meet with you, Judge.
We are speaking with our guest, Judge Steve Leifman. A little bit about the judge. Man, there's so much to speak about you, which we spend more than half an hour.
Let's not talk. That's the boring part. Let's get to the issue.
Okay. But the Associate Administrative Judge, right?
Yes, sir.
In Miami-Dade County over mental health court.
Yes.
And that's a program that's near and dear to your heart. I call you a pioneer because, and I'm not original on that because I know that others have called you the same thing, but you started this court out of recognition. And for those of you that we don't want to get too far into it without understanding and framing it out, this is not a program, as I've learned, to be taught soft on crime. This is about identifying the people who have mental health problems. Correct. The people that need help. Judge, tell us about this,
Sure.
and let's get right into it.
Sure, and thank you also, not only for hosting this show and helping educate our community about these issues, but also for your amazing career in public service.
Thank you, sir.
This project started in 2000, 23 years ago. It started one morning when I was getting ready to go on the bench. I had a defendant who turned out to be a Harvard-educated psychiatrist that worked at Jackson Memorial Hospital. He had a late onset of schizophrenia. He became homeless. He was psychotic, and he started cycling in and out of the criminal justice system. His parents came to court to talk to me with the lawyers. He ended up having a full-blown psychotic episode in my courtroom. I ordered all these very expensive evaluations to see if he was competent to proceed on a ridiculous misdemeanor that he had been charged with. He probably spent 10, 12 weeks in jail on a charge that nobody ever goes to jail for a day. And at the end of everything, because he was adjudicated incompetent to stand trial and it was only a misdemeanor, the law did not let me do anything. I had to release him back to the street, imminently dangerous to self or others, floridly psychotic and sick as could be. And I don't think any of us go into our professions to be part of that kind of problem. Not only were we not doing anything to help his own illness, we were not doing anything to improve our public safety. In fact, people don't understand that 70% of people in jail in the United States today, they either have a serious mental illness, a substance use disorder, or both. And so we have two choices. We can continue to release people without any treatment and watch them come right back, or we could make sure that they get access to treatment, reduce recidivism, and let them get into a life of hope and opportunity. And that's what we've been able to do. The program has far exceeded any expectations that we have had. I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes, but as a result of this program, we've almost reduced the number of arrests in Dade County by more than half. We've almost reduced our jail audit by half, and we've closed one of our 3 main jails here in Dade County, saving taxpayers to date over $120 million.
Now, hold that thought right 1 second. How much have you saved taxpayers?
Just as for closing one jail, $120 million so far, $12 million a year. The jail's been closed for 10 years. That's $120 million, not in cost shifting, but in real savings to the county taxpayer because they don't have to operate that facility.
That's incredible. And David, as we've been discussing the silent struggle, right? The struggle that many people face. It's not just first responders, it's not just the homeless. It's many people across the community are facing the struggle with dealing with stuff that they don't, emotions, just a sense that they're not right. Here we have a judge from the bench recognizing that people need assistance. What are your thoughts? As a retired police chief, as a person who commanded police, both in the city of Miami and other municipalities, I mean, let's get into it, man.
This was 20 years ago, so you definitely credit the proactive, and that's the word we use often for this, proactivity instead of reacting of the judge and the program that was put forth. You know, I watched the video, and it was so interesting. The thing that jumped out
Which
at me,
video?
the one that showed about the
Diversion program?
right.
Definition of insanity?
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
it's
yeah,
called.
yeah.
Documentary.
The documentary.
But what caught me, being the historian perhaps, was something in early 63 that JFK said, quote, have to offer something more than a crowded custodial care. That's in 63. Finally, in 2000, the mold is set now for doing it right. And there's more to go, I'm sure, but you know, the numbers don't lie. And with that's a massive success. So I credit the proactivity and seeing the difference that, listen, people, they need the help, and the jails shouldn't be that place to go to. Unfortunately, that's what it had become. But you can see now, and shifting over to policing with CIT, with training officers to see things more clearly, and for lack of a better word, have cooler heads prevailing on the scene that can respond anywhere. I'm not talking from the city of Miami. They can respond and deal with the issue before it gets out of hand. And before this, I can tell you from experience, things did get out of hand to a certain extent. So this is a great program.
So, Judge, you started your division, right?
As the associate administrative judge, well, I was already the
Explain
associate
to us.
administrator. So this crisis came up.
Yeah.
I had this case. I had to release this guy back to the street, floridly psychotic.
You must have felt like crap doing this,
I was
right?
livid.
Oh,
I didn't know if I
God.
was more upset or angry. And I'm like, why are we doing this? And, you know, when in most professions, you're taught how to do something. You're not taught to ask if it's working right or not. You follow rules. This is what you do. And that's what I used to do. And then when this case came in, it was such a stark smack in the face of everything that was wrong, not just with the criminal justice system, but also with the community mental health system, and how there was no collaboration, there was no coordination. We were spending between $1 and $2 million a year in Dade County just on psychological evaluations for people charged with petty misdemeanors, so that we could adjudicate them incompetent, release them back to the street, and I don't know, expect them to get better on their own. That was the definition of insanity, doing the same thing again and again and expecting a better outcome. And so as a result of this case, and fortuitously, the first national meeting on this issue was in Miami that year. I went, it was like a religious revival for me. They were really brilliant, thoughtful people from around the U.S. It was a D.C. program through SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Administration and Mental Health, and they had real solutions. And I was able to coax them to give us a grant, to send us 3 experts, and we put together this 2-day summit. And I think the best thing about being a judge is that when we invite people to meetings, they come. And so I brought all the traditional and non-traditional stakeholders into a 2-day
You had elected
meeting.
people, you had
I had
stakeholders,
county
right?
commissioners, I had judges, the elected state attorney, the elected public defender, the director, police chiefs, Department of Children and Families, providers, family members, consumers, everybody was in the room. Jackson, you name it. And we spent the first half day mapping out on paper the intersection between the criminal justice system and the community mental health system. And what we found in a half a day is that we were embarrassingly dysfunctional. We had created a system to fail perfectly, and it perfectly failed. And it was expensive. It's not like we're not spending money. We just spend it in all the wrong places. So we put together a written collaborative agreement. This wasn't about developing a mental health court. That's kind of the least of what you need. It was about making a structural change, that we would set up a diversion system so that we could do pre and post arrest diversion. Part of it was teaching law enforcement how to identify people in crisis. As the chief was saying, how to de-escalate these situations so they didn't escalate, and then where to take people. And we got every provider in town to sign an agreement, and Jackson and the police, everyone signed this agreement. And it has been amazing.
You know, a credit to that, David, we were talking about this last week, right? We had an incident play out in the news in South Florida, Mr. Booth, that was jumped on the rescue truck in an intersection in the city of Miramar, where he was on top of the truck. And you mentioned something to me about how times have changed, how they had isolated, credit to the officers who responded to that scene, but they surrounded, they isolated the individual, they let him play out. I want to talk about that because that leads to the change that the judge is talking about.
Well, the mindset for sure. Okay. 2 decades ago, somebody would have climbed up on the truck and pulled the guy off.
Somebody is in police.
Somebody is in police. What they see now, what has transpired is they recognized it for what it was. The person wasn't a threat to himself or the public, right? They let it play out. They slowed things down. And that's part of the escalation. Slow it down, clear a mind. He came down. He'll get the help he needs, hopefully, but it didn't end in a violent way. There was no need for that.
Well, we had a case about 20 years ago. You may remember it when you were at the city of Miami. He was a Vietnam vet. He used to walk around the 12th Avenue Bridge. There used to be a Lums over on the other side, on the little Havana side. You remember that, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
And so he had this little penknife, and he would tap it on the window to try to get food. And they called the police, and they hadn't really started CIT at that point, and they did everything wrong. They had like 14, 15 officers. They surrounded him. They tried to put a thing over him, and they closed down the whole street. This is like 2, 3 in the morning. They ended up walking over the bridge. They're putting lights in his face. They're antagonizing him. They end up underneath, where the jurors park under 836.
Mm-hmm.
And after this 4-hour standoff, he lunged at one of the police officers, and they ended up shooting him 14 times and killing him.
Yeah.
And his psychiatrist, who was at Jackson, I met with her, and she said, in his mind, he wasn't surrounded by 14 police officers. He was surrounded by 14 Viet Cong.
PTSD.
He had severe PTSD. And he thought that if he was going down, he was taking one of them with him. He didn't intend to hurt anybody. And the officers that ended up shooting him felt horrible when they learned about him, too. Nobody wins. In fact, we were talking before the show, one of the greatest results of this program is our police shootings have almost stopped. I mean, significantly. And it saved the city millions of dollars.
For our viewers, can you explain about this training you were talking about?
Sure.
What does CIT mean and the basis of the training?
So the basis of the program is 2 parts. And if we had to do it again, I'd have a 3-part, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. But the first part is pre-arrest. How do we reduce the number of people with mental illnesses getting arrested? How do we reduce the number of use of force and all that stuff? So we looked around the country. This is 23 years ago. This is in 2000. And the best program in the country at the time was a program called Crisis Intervention Team Policing. It started in Memphis, Tennessee. It's a 40-hour training program that teaches law enforcement how to identify someone who's in crisis, how to de-escalate the situation, and where to transport them as opposed to arresting them. We keep amazing data on the city of Miami and Miami-Dade. Over the last 10 years, the city of Miami and Miami-Dade have handled 105,268,000 mental health calls, and they only made 198 arrests.
How many years?
10 years. 198 arrests out of over 105,000 mental health calls. That is unbelievable. So the number of arrests in Dade County as a result of that went from 118,000 a year to 53,000. We've saved the county so far 400 years of jail bed days just from the pre-arrest program. Mm-hmm. Police shootings have almost stopped. Police injuries have almost stopped. And everybody wins.
Yeah.
And as a result of that program, the one thing that we had not anticipated was the unfortunate amount of PTSD among law enforcement officers. My director, who runs our CIT for the county, her name is Hopsy Kaba. She's amazing.
We look forward to having her on a future interview real soon here.
Great. She gets about 250 calls a month from police officers for their own personal mental health issues. Yeah. And because of that, we went to the Police Chiefs Association. We worked out an arrangement. We get the officers referred to treatment. They all have insurance. We find them good providers, and they're doing great. And I think that's part of what's happened. There's been this cultural shift among law enforcement officers. They're more empathetic. They understand it. And now you're the cool police officer if you get hit by somebody with a mental illness and don't arrest. You're kind of the wimp if you get touched by somebody and you do arrest. And we can see it in the data.
Yeah.
And they have done an amazing job, and they deserve all the credit in the world for responding. But we also have a post-arrest diversion system. So if you do get arrested, and sometimes people have to get arrested, this isn't about not arresting. It's arresting the right people, identifying the right people, and then diverting the right people out if they, qualify. We've diverted about 7,000 people out of jail. Our recidivism rate among our misdemeanor population went from 75% to 20%. Our recidivism rate among our felony population went from 75% to 6% for those that finished the program, which is most everybody. It's unbelievable. It saved the county 84 years of jail bed days just from the felony diversion program. And we have leverage because they're in the criminal system, and we get them housing, we get them treatment, we get a peer assigned to them, that's somebody with lived experiences, we get them their medication, we get them transportation, we help them reestablish relationships, and we give them their lives back. And in the vast majority of cases, they go into recovery and do not come back into the criminal system. Now, there's about 20 to 30% of the population that is just too sick for what's available out there. And the reason that is that when we in the U.S., not we, but the U.S. designed and developed the community mental health system, the most acutely ill were still in hospitals, the people with the very serious psychotic disorders. So the community mental health system in America was really designed for people with moderate mental illnesses. People should think about mental illnesses just like you would think about any other illness, like cancer, right? You have stage 4, it's very serious. You need to go to, either Baptist or Jackson or MD Anderson or Sloan. You go to one of the best institutions, right? If you have a little skin cancer, you go somewhere else and they take care of it. Well, mental illness is similar. There are different levels of this. And for the kind of the stage 4 mental illness, the really serious psychotic disorders, there's nothing for people. And so as a result of all the money that we have saved the county, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars at this point, the county's been great, and they have reinvested a lot of the money, and we are just about ready to open the first of its kind in the United States, a one-stop shop mental health diversion facility for the most acutely ill who continuously cycle in spite of all the great efforts that we've made. This building is spectacular. It has a receiving facility. It's the old competency restoration facility, except we're going to use it for something useful.
7th Avenue and about 23rd Street?
Between 22 and 23rd.
Okay.
Great memory. It's
Northwest.
Right. It's 181,000 square feet. It's beautiful. We have renovated it. We had a great architect. We had a great developer, contractor. They did an amazing job. So there's a receiving facility. There is a crisis stabilization unit. There's a locked short-term residential facility. There's a day activity program that'll be run by people with mental illnesses to teach self-sufficiency. There's a culinary supportive employment program that Miami-Dade College is going to run with Workforce Florida so that we can teach people job
Workforce
skills.
development training, that's
Correct.
awesome.
So when they leave, they'll have jobs. But it also has a primary clinic, a dental clinic, an eye clinic, a podiatry clinic, tattoo removal, because people do silly things when they're under the influence and psychotic. It also has a courtroom in the building, so we can manage both criminal cases and civil cases. So we can do Baker Acts and Marchman Act cases. And it has 208 beds of housing. So instead of just kicking people to the curb like we've been doing, once we adjudicate their case, we can take the most acutely ill that are costing the most money, that are cycling in and out of the most, get them the level of care that they need, and make sure that they're gently reintegrated back into the community with the supports that they need to maintain their recovery. And everybody wins. We improve our public safety, we save taxpayers millions and millions of dollars, and we give people hope and opportunity. This last budget cycle, the county spent $478 million on the Department of Corrections. $310 million of that went to 3,100 people with mental illnesses in our jail, who most of them
Can you repeat those figures again, please?
The county spends right now on a daily basis, let me tell you, $848,000 a day. That's $310 million a year to warehouse 3,100 people in the jail with serious mental illnesses, and the county has to pay 100% of the cost. And the reason is because when you're behind bars, you don't qualify for Medicaid, Social Security. And the one thing we never talk about, most of this population has very serious primary health issues. 50% of smokers in the United States have a serious mental illness. There's a reason. The nicotine stimulates the dopamine in the brain, and they're self-medicating themselves. And so what happens is they end up with cancer and heart disease and diabetes and all these other illnesses because they smoke so much. And when they go to the jail, the county has to pay 100% of that bill, and it's $310 million a year for 3,100 people. And compared to the state, you used to be in the legislature, the state only spends about $47 million or $42 million for all of Dade and Monroe mental health services.
Well, that's what struck me when we discussed this, right? Years
Is that
ago when I was sitting in the
absurd?
legislature.
Yeah.
No, as we were getting into budget, and we're looking to ratify a state budget for, almost $100 billion, right? But, I want to bring it back a little bit because the purpose of the show is to deal with and destigmatize, if you will, the struggle of mental illness. We know a lot of people that have illness are struggling, but we want to make the point to say that not all homeless, not all criminals or people who are cycling through the criminal system are the only ones that can be impacted by your program.
Oh, no. In fact, the beauty of this is you don't have to commit a crime to get this level of service. If you are at risk and you are severely ill, we will get you referred before you get into the criminal justice system. And that's what we want to do. We want to decriminalize the issue. And what people need to understand is that recovery rates for many of these illnesses, many of these mental illnesses, are actually better than heart disease and diabetes. These are not death sentences. People can have full recovery. At our peak, before COVID kind of, hurt our staffing needs, I had 8 peers working for me. Those are people with lived experiences. 4 of them graduated from our program with very serious mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. They are in full recovery. Many of them are married, have kids. They have full lives today, and they are participating members of society, contributing members of society. People can recover. The problem is we never had a system of care in the community that was built for them. And so when we cut back housing, when we went to the war on drugs and crime, when we deinstitutionalized the hospitals, we threw this population out into a system that was never built for them. And now we're catching up and we're building a system around them that actually helps them recovery. And COVID has made things much worse, unfortunately.
I guess that's why you're the chair of, or is it the co-chair of the Criminal Justice and Mental Health Committee, but also the committee that solves problems for the courts.
Yes. Yeah, well, I chair the Florida Supreme Court's steering committee on this issue.
Man, David, what are your thoughts?
Judge Salfi said something. It's a couple of words, but she said something that resonated with me as far as this.
Is that from the documentary?
Yeah. Rehabilitation and redemption. The rehabilitation we all know, but the redemption, that word redemption, redeeming, bringing somebody back into the fold, that goes a long way. And taking a step back a couple minutes when talking about law enforcement and that stigma still that you have to do it, in the dead of night, so to speak. You seem weak if you go get help. No, actually, you're strong if you do it. And we'll revert back to our first show when we had Chief Manny Morales, who just stated right out.
Valiantly.
Yeah,
That was leadership at its best.
He's a great guy.
And that's a note everybody should take down and take to heart. There is no weakness in helping yourself. We spoke about this. If you tweak your back, you're going to a chiropractor, right? Along those lines, the same thing. You don't wait. If you got the flu, you're going to see a physician, right? You're not going to wait, okay? These things heal themselves. You need that extra help, that extra push, because what goes on in the mind, it's secular, and you got to get the right assistance, whether it's on a criminal point or not. It doesn't matter. You got to get that. You got to redeem yourself. You got to get that redemption. And that's so important.
We know so much more about these illnesses today than we knew 20 years ago. So a couple things that we know. 92% of the women who are in jail and prison in the United States with mental illnesses have horrific histories of trauma, mostly sexual abuse. They're victims. And a young brain that is traumatized and exposed is more likely to get PTSD than an older brain. Yeah. And 75% of men who are in jail and prison with mental illnesses also have horrific histories of trauma, sometimes sexual abuse, more likely they were victims of domestic violence, or they're witnesses to really violent crimes. Those things actually contribute to changing the brain chemistry and contributing to people getting a serious mental health disorder.
You know, I'm looking through my notes because I'm reflecting on the training I had in law enforcement, and I think, and I've had a lot of training between the military, law enforcement, and my public sector, 36 years of public service. Man, the best training I've ever went to was that CIT training. I credit it not just for me handling these situations better and providing better outcomes, but I also credit it for the outcomes of my officers and the officers at large in Miami-Dade County, the reduction of incidents where one of contact, violent contact, but also experiences that lead to mental health, whether the officer's, well-being or the subject who's suffering, or even the community. God, I mean, I wish we can continue this conversation with you a lot longer. I think this deserves part 2. We have 3 minutes left, 3.5 minutes left, but I can't say enough about your program, Judge. And for the audience, if you will, for the viewer that's out there struggling, from a man from your bench perspective, can you provide them some words of how to deal with this so we don't have incidents like we recently saw with Director Ramirez where consequential actions.
Yep.
They're not alone.
No, none of us are. And COVID made things so much worse, both for people that got it. It actually can be a trigger for these illnesses, but also the isolation from COVID made things much worse. And people need to know that there is help out there for you. We do have a public mental health system. It is terribly under-resourced, but you can reach out for help. The main entity is called Thriving Mind. It's what we call the South Florida Behavioral Health Network. And you can Google that or call information and get their phone number.
Can you repeat the name one more time, please?
Thriving Mind, and they are the public system. And the other thing is, if you do need the assistance of law enforcement in a situation, and it is a matter involving someone with a mental health issue, let the dispatcher know that you need a CIT officer, Crisis Intervention Team Police officer. We have the largest trained squad in the United States. We have over 8,500 officers trained, and it'll help them to get the right officer out who will know what to do and also can help refer people to services when they come out there. And know that the officer is going to react appropriately. They're not going to overreact because they've been incredibly well trained and they're doing an amazing job with this. And you should have the confidence. And you should also have the confidence that you can recover. People recover for these illnesses, just like they recover from other illnesses. And as I said earlier, they can recover better from these illnesses, but they need access to treatment. You need to find a good doctor. You need to get the right diagnosis and the right medication. And you need to put the supports around people to help them do it. But it is very, very doable, and we see it every single day. And I'm an optimist as a result. I mean, it's working.
Yeah. I mean, what can I say? How can we follow that?
No, you can't. You just got to keep pushing and make sure that this comes to fruition with massive success. There should be no quagmires are holding it up. This is so successful. Again, the proof is in the pudding. I just want to add one thing real quick, talking about PTSD.
We have a minute.
PTSD and the police officers. It's just, again, it's so extremely important. We see things that we shouldn't see. People shouldn't see it. Obviously, that takes its toll. Mm-hmm. It takes its toll. So really, I keep pushing it. We keep pushing it. Get the help you need. It's a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah, 15 to 35% of police officers have severe PTSD. More officers died last year from suicide than in the line of duty.
Yeah, that is true.
And that's a tragic number that can be avoided. It's much better here in Dade because of the training and the treatment access that we have, but it's unnecessary. And you have a lot of returning vets that go into law enforcement that already have trauma issues, that are getting re-traumatized, or they're getting traumatized on the force. And we can look at MRIs today. We can see a change in brain activity as a result of trauma. And so it's just like any other illness.
Yeah.
If you broke your arm, you'd run in and you'd get treatment. And if you did it in the line of duty, everyone sign it and be so proud. I broke my arm tackling this jerk. But if your brain gets broken, you should also be proud that you're going to get treatment because you're helping all of us and you're such a credit to our community and we want to see you well.
I guess there are two takeaways. One is that you're not alone. There's help for you. And two, that the struggle does not stop with law enforcement or homeless. It's across the county. So we all have to be vigilant and supportive of seeking help.
These
Judge,
illnesses do not discriminate, and we got to get that building open so that we can help
well,
a whole nother group
let's
of
talk
people.
about that on the next time because we want to talk about it, getting the building open. On that note, to the Millers Community News team, we can't thank you enough. My co-host, David Magnusson. Chief, I can't thank you enough for bringing this issue to light. Judge, we look forward to speaking with you. And again, our gratitude to you. Stay tuned because our next show will entail the director of let's see if I get this right, the Crisis Response Team for Miami-Dade County, Luciana Beltran. Look forward to speaking with you guys. Thank you. Drop us a line. Let us know what you think.